You know, like many of you, I have an ironing board at my house. And my ironing board serves the same function as your ironing board. It is a surface for which I can put my clothes on and use the iron to iron my clothes. And yes, I do iron my own clothes. But my ironing board serves some other purposes. For instance, my ironing board is also a shelf. There are many times when you can find folded clothes sitting on top of it because I'm too lazy to put them away. My ironing board can also serve as an open closet. After ironing clothes, a lot of times I'll leave them hanging there underneath the ironing board because, again, too lazy to take them and put them up. And if you're very careful, my ironing board can serve as a step. I've actually positioned it just right against the wall and carefully put my knee up on it to reach something that was too high otherwise. And you know, it makes you wonder, did the inventor of the ironing board pitch his product that way? This is an ironing board and it serves at least 15 different functions. I don't think so, do you? No, my guess is the inventor of the ironing board pitched the ironing board as a surface for which you can iron your clothes on. You know, whether we're talking about ironing boards or people, they function best when they function as they were designed. We are at our best when we function for the reason for which we were designed. On the sixth day of creation, God reached down and He made man from the dust of the earth. And ever since that day, man has been looking upward. The Greeks had a name for man. It was anthropos, which means the upward-looking one. Man was made with the ability to look up to God in worship. But we were not made to worship just anyone and in any way that we please. As we know, we were made to worship the one true God in the way that He has prescribed. In Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is confronted by Satan, who takes him up on a high mountain that overlooks all the kingdoms in their glory. And Satan says, "All these things I will give to you if you fall down and worship me." And Jesus, of course, responds with the words, "Go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve Him only." Our worship is exclusively reserved for God and God alone. In John 4:24, it reads, "God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth." Must, in that passage, is a non-negotiable term. We don't get to tailor worship to fit our desires. We don't get to alter the prescribed plan. We don't get to worship God in any way that we choose or any way that we please. We must worship Him in spirit and in truth. It is our very nature to worship. And it is my belief that everyone worships something. The person who says, "Well, no one has control over me, I'm my own person," wrong. Everyone serves a master. Everyone worships something. Either they worship the God with a big G, the one and only true God, or they worship a little g God. Or maybe they worship a variety of those little g gods. Maybe it's not just one, maybe it's a bunch of them. You know, Joshua had something to say about this. In chapter 24 of Joshua, starting in verse 14, it reads, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which are beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And so Joshua tells his audience that they have to choose. We're all confronted with a choice. Everyone will worship something, and we all have to choose whether it will be that big G God or a little g God. But you have to choose. Don't you find it interesting that Joshua gives three options besides the one true God? I've never offered an invitation that was multiple choice. But Joshua understood something. He understood that even though he was their leader, even though he was the one in charge, you can't force worship. You can't coerce it. You can't demand it. It's got to be chosen, because the only type of worship that means anything is the type of worship that is chosen out of a heart that loves God so deeply that it wants to praise Him with all of its being. And so Joshua says, well, you can serve, the gods of your fathers. You can serve the gods of Egypt where you just left, or you can serve the gods of those people that you defeated, or you can serve the big G God, but the choice is yours, door 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? Because Joshua understood that everybody's going to make a choice, just you need to make the right choice. Don't be fooled into believing that worship only applies to religion, because it does not. Everyone worships something, even those who aren't that interested in religion. Worship is a human reflex that we all have. It's about putting our hope in someone or something and then chasing after it. You esteem that something, and because you esteem it so much and so highly, you sacrifice. You give things to it. You do whatever is necessary to have it because it means that much to you. And we worship a lot of little G's in our culture, don't we? We worship our sports. We worship our career. We worship money. When our favorite athlete does something great, we make a bowing motion. Everyone worships something, and it's not necessarily tied to religion. Unfortunately, not everyone worships the big G God as they should. We'll pay out the nose, we'll sacrifice to the hilt just to teach our child how to throw a ball. We'll do whatever is possible to climb that ladder of success because we want what's at the top of it. And all the while, the big G God is put on the back burner, and we pay Him no homage. Sometimes it just happens. We don't try to do it. It almost happens subconsciously. We find ourselves working so hard toward an earthly goal that we wake up one day and realize that we're chasing after something that is futile, that really doesn't help us in the long run anyway. We build this empire of dirt only to discover that it is dirt, right? Whatever you choose is going to lead you somewhere. So you better choose wisely. My oldest daughter, Keely, need to update that bio. She's now 19. She's a freshman at Freed-Hardeman. And she's talking about, the guy situation. And she had this one guy that she liked, and, she felt like that, she'd like to spend some time with. And she was talking about some of the things, though, that she didn't agree with. And I said, Keely, don't ever attach yourself to someone until you know what they worship. Because whatever a person worships, they will become. And whatever they worship will lead them somewhere. You never want to attach yourself to someone who is worshiping something other than the big G God. And you yourself never want to attach yourself to a little G God, but rather the one true God. We often think about jealousy in a negative light. Read with me what is said in Exodus chapter 20. Starting in verse 4. It says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments." For us, jealousy is tainted with negativity. It's like the junior high boy who's playing basketball and he won't pass the ball to his teammates because he doesn't want them to have the glory. He's jealous of them. He wants all the glory for himself. Or the junior high girl that spreads a rumor about a pretty girl in school so that she doesn't get any attention because she wants it all for herself. It's rather junior high-ish in our minds. But interestingly enough, God is not junior high-ish in any sense, and that's not what is being talked about here when it says that God is a jealous God. Because when jealousy is applied to God in the original language, it actually is synonymous with zealous. And what is zealous? To be zealous for something means to have an intense enthusiasm. It means to pursue something with all diligence. God is zealous for you and me. I don't have to tell you, He wants a relationship with you and me. He loves you and desires a relationship with you. That's the context of being jealous there. I'd be a little bit put out if my wife wasn't jealous if another woman was flirting with me. Not that that ever happens, but if it did, I would be a little nervous if my wife just kind of brushed that off. I would expect if some woman was making advances toward me that my wife would be angry with that. Because if she's jealous like that, that means she's zealous for me. That means that she wants my attention, that she wants that relationship with me to stay intact, and she doesn't want anyone treading on that territory. Well, think about God in that situation. You have made a covenant with God. At least I think most of you here have. That is an exclusive relationship. And God wants it to remain exclusive. We shouldn't be battling other gods in our lives. We should be serving the one true God. And God certainly doesn't want to be in competition with other little g gods. He wants your undivided heart and mind. Think about this. What if you were to walk into a restaurant and see me sitting there having dinner with another woman that's not my wife? Some of you who know me well would come over to me and you'd say, "Chris, what are you doing?" I'd say, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's not your wife." And I say, "Hey, relax. I'm just on a date. No big deal." And you would say, "What in the world are you talking about? You can't go on a date. You are married to Libby. This can't happen." I say, "Hey, whoa. I still love her. I just like this woman too." That wouldn't set well with you, and it shouldn't. Because I have made a covenant with my wife. The two of us have become one. It is an exclusive relationship. Just as the relationship with God is an exclusive relationship. God doesn't ask to be number one on your list. He asks to be the only one on your list. He demands your undivided attention. There are not a bunch of other little g gods competing for his time and attention, or at least there shouldn't be. He is the only one that deserves our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. It all comes down to a decision on our part. God demands exclusive rights to your heart. He does not request to be placed at the top. He does not request to have as much time and attention as the other gods in your life. He doesn't expect to have 90% of it while the other gods get 10. He demands our whole heart. And there's good reason that he demands it. Because he is the only one that deserves it. He is the only God that is truly God and that can deliver in any and every situation. I've always been a Dallas Cowboys fan. In fact, when I was younger, I was a Troy Aikman fan more than I was a Dallas Cowboys fan. It's hard to be a Dallas Cowboys fan right now, but I'm trying to stick it out, trying to deal with it. But back in 1992, the Cowboys were about to play the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game. This had become a pretty big rivalry. And so the winner was going to go to the Super Bowl, and they had a pep rally at the old Cowboys Stadium, not the new one, but the old one that was in Irving, Texas. And fans filled that stadium for this pep rally. And they came wearing their jerseys. Some had their helmets on. They painted their faces just like a regular football game. They came in, they sat in the stands, they packed the place, and they paraded out the players and the cheerleaders. And people cheered. People cheered wildly as they... Is that me or is that y'all? Or is that the devil? Whatever. The people cheered wildly as they saw their team, the cheerleaders and everybody going through their whole routine. Some of the players, they spoke and gave, maybe a little bit of an inspirational talk. But afterwards, they interviewed some of these fans. And not one of them said, "Well, that was a dud." Nobody threw a ball or ran or scored a touchdown. Why? Because they understood why they were there. One fan even said, "I hope the players appreciate how much we appreciate them." They knew why they were there. They were there to show their appreciation. They knew that it wasn't a football game or that there wouldn't be a touchdown scored. They just wanted to come and give praise to their beloved team. Do we know why we're here? Do we know why we gather on Sunday? Do we understand what worship is about? Do we understand the one that we are giving praise to? I hope so. But so many times what happens is that we miss the point of worship. Christians often view worship as an obligation. It's something you do. You get up, you go to church because that's what you're supposed to do. And worship becomes rote and routine. You come in, you're constantly checking the clock, hoping and praying that it will be over soon. You want to tell how somebody is treating church like an obligation? Watch them if someone answers the invitation. And they may roll their eyes. They get uncomfortable because they know they're going to be there a little bit longer than normal. Folks, hell isn't big enough for an attitude like that. We are so used to worshiping on a clock and participating in checklist Christianity that we can't even give God our heart. Worship has become an obligation for many people. Worship has also become a simple activity, nothing more and nothing less. Worship is something, or church is something that occurs at a building twice a week at an agreed upon time. That's it. You compartmentalize it like you do everything else in your life. I have my work, check. I have school, check. Have my leisure time, check. And I have worship, check. Instead of church being your whole life, it's just a part of your life. And so when that happens, it becomes just a simple activity. And also, what we see with church so often is it's become consumer-driven. The customer is always right. It's become a practice now that many churches go out and they poll or they survey the unchurched. And they ask them, what would bring you through our doors? And then they take those responses and they craft worship to satisfy them. Now, there's a couple of problems with that. Number one, man doesn't get to decide what worship is acceptable to God, and certainly not the unchurched. And secondly, stay with me on this, how many times do you see in worship in the Bible where worship was to be solely evangelistic? Where do you find in the Bible that worship was to be only for the lost? I would hope that our church services at the Oldham Lane Church of Christ, where I preach, are evangelistic in nature, but that's not why we do it. We don't craft our worship services solely for the lost, because when I read the Bible and I read about worship that occurred in the Bible, I read it was for one person and one person only. For God, right? It's for Him. He is the audience. And I hope that attracts people, but that's not the reason we do it. Worship is for God and to edify the saints. The customer is always wrong when it comes to Christianity. That's why Christ had to die on a cross. So we've got to dispel of this consumer-driven mentality. We've got to stop treating church like it's some obligation or chore, and we've got to stop looking at church like it's just a simple activity. Many of our churches today are monuments to a once great movement. In Brinkley, Arkansas, where my dad is from, there is an old church building of a Church of Christ that stood for many years that is now empty, and it sits on the premises of a graveyard, and I can't help but see that connection. Many of the people that are buried in that cemetery went to that church. I would hate to know that the church at North MacArthur, at Oldham Lane, is peaceful and is quiet because it's nothing more than a cemetery or a graveyard. For many people, worship has lost its luster. We don't value worship like we used to. You know what the greatest threat to the Lord's church is? It's not the government. It's not liberalism. It's not even false teaching. You know what the number one threat to the Lord's church is? Apathy, complacency, lethargy. It's the lukewarm worshiper. Every Sunday there are people who fill our auditoriums that are lukewarm. And the sad thing is, not that they're lukewarm, that's bad enough, but they like it. They're okay with it. They love it. And no matter what the preacher says, they're going to go out those doors and they're going to continue to live a lukewarm life because their standards are so low, they don't know any different. They don't expect anything more from themselves. Christians, I think, in many places have forgotten the price that was paid for them. They have forgotten what God has done for them, and so therefore their worship is not inspired. There's not the passion that should be there because they have forgotten what God has done for them, or they have ignored it. And we need to get back to who we are and why we are here. When we gain a deeper understanding of who we are and who God is, we cannot help but worship. Let me ask you this. How many blessings do you have in your life that can be directly attributed to God? Yeah, let me answer. You stole my thunder. I was going to say, let me answer for you every single one of them, right? When was the last time you got down on your knees in prayerful supplication, begging God for forgiveness? When was the last time that tears streamed down your face as you asked God for something in your life because you knew you couldn't handle it yourself? We've all gone to God at times and begged and pleaded with Him to answer a prayer. We ask God for everything. He has given us everything, and we struggle to give Him anything. Let's not forget what our God has done for us. And I'm not going to tell you count your many blessings, because a lot of those blessings, they're merely earthly. And then if you lose those, then you're even more upset, right? Count the blesser. Because if you had none of those things, you still have everything. As long as God is first in your life, you have everything you truly need anyway. Danish theologian Soren Kierkegaard once said this concerning worship. He said, many people think of church like a theater. The audience sits in the pews, the preacher is on stage to perform, and the bulletin is the program. Church is like a theater, except that the people in the pews are not the audience. God is. In reality, there is an audience of one. Worship is not for us. It is for God. And worship that comes from the heartfelt, genuine faith and love of His children delights God. It brings a smile to His face. Wow, how well said is that? And the first part of that, I think, is very applicable today. We have forgotten who the audience is. Maybe not us in this room, but overall, I think we've forgotten who the audience is. It's not us. You know how many problems would be solved and that you wouldn't need near as many elders dealing with and putting out fires, or preachers and staff putting out fires, if people understood that this isn't about you? Church isn't about you. Christianity isn't about you. We look at Christianity like 1 + 1, like a mathematical equation, like an addition problem. Me plus God. Christianity is subtraction. It's not addition. It's not you plus God. It's just God. You're not in the equation any longer. That's what Paul said. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who's I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. I no longer live, right? This isn't about you. It's about God. It's not enough to worship. You got to worship the right God and in the right way. Do you believe that worship can be worthless? Jesus said it could be, Matthew 15, verses 8 and 9. You see, worship is the genuine, willful expression of our spirit in ways that God has revealed through His Word. Worship is a verb. It's something that we do. It is an action demonstrating our hearts. It is responding to God in praise. The two most used descriptive words in the Bible for worship are proskuneo and latreuo. Now, proskuneo, as Brother Winkler pointed out earlier, is defined as the custom of prostrating oneself before a person and kissing his feet, the hem of his garment, the ground, etc. It is used as an act of homage or reverence, whereas latreuo means literally to serve or render religious service or homage. It can refer to carrying out of religious duties, especially of cultic nature, by human beings. Not only does this word imply religious significance, it also implies sacrificial significance. So one form of the word latreo means to serve or worship cultically, especially by sacrifice. What we find in the usage of these two terms throughout the Bible is that worship involves two elements. On the one hand, it involves the inner attitude of the worshiper, which is proskuneo, and on the other, it involves the external acts that he or she does, which is latreuo. Some choose to ignore the external and only focus on the internal. And when this happens, worship becomes just a warm, fuzzy feeling, not much else. It's like cotton candy. Tastes good, but there's not a lot of substance. And then some choose to focus only on the external and remove the internal. And you know what happens there? Worship becomes legalistic. It becomes rote and routine. There's no heart that's involved. Remember that the two are married together and they cannot be divorced. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and in truth. Spirit refers to the right attitude, the internal. Truth refers to the external, the standard. So you have them both, and you have to have them both. There is a sense when some people say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter what you do. It doesn't really matter what you do in worship when you gather as the saints, because all of life is worship. Well, that's not exactly true. It is and it isn't, right? Changing your baby's diaper isn't worship. Sorry. Going to the bathroom isn't worship. If everything in life were worship, then a serial killer could claim that they are worshiping God by doing the things that they do. But there is a sense in that everything we do, in word or deed, we do all in the name of the Lord. And there is a sense that when we come together as the saints, we come together to follow a form and a function in worship, but not just to do those things. We give our heart, because worship is a verb. It's demonstrating our hearts to God. In Nehemiah chapter 9, we find the people coming back to the heart of worship. This is one of the redeeming moments in the history of Israel. And I say one of because, sadly, there had to be many. The Israelite people are confronted with their blatant disobedience, and in their guilt and shame, they hold a fast unto God, and they confess their sins. They acknowledge their own guilt and the goodness of God, and in verse 5 of Nehemiah chapter 9, it reads, "Arise, bless the Lord your God forever and ever." Do you like long prayers? Well, this is a rather lengthy prayer. And you know, we often look at our watch, and all of you pull out your watch when that one guy gets up to lead a prayer because you want to time it and see if he breaks his own record. This had to be breaking a record right here. What follows is a lengthy prayer, but one that was certainly necessary. If we are to stand up and praise our God properly, then we're going to have to come broken. And specifically, we have to come and break our misconceptions. You see, if you read through verses 6 and following of Nehemiah chapter 9, you notice phrases like this: "You alone are Lord. You are the Lord God. You are righteous. You gave them kingdoms and people. You, God, you did this." So the people are recognizing who is in control, who's in charge, and who they need to revert back to. And that's always where we start. Our offering to God must be one that He desires. You see, Cain thought that he could bring any old offering. Nadab and Abihu thought that they could bring an offering that God didn't ask for. King Saul thought that he could offer the burnt offering. Uzziah took it upon himself to do the work reserved for the priest. The standard for worship, though, has already been set. We don't get to change that. It's not up for a vote. He didn't ask our opinion on it. We follow. That is our obligation. The people in Nehemiah's day, at least at this point, understood that. The question is not, how does this suit me? The question is God pleased? That's the question we must ask. We must dismiss any preconceived notions, because when we come to worship with a personal prejudice or a preconceived notion, we've already set the tone for worship. We've already said it's going to be all about me. And we've got too much of that going on in the religious world. Another thing that we must break is our worldly focus. In verse 35 of Nehemiah chapter 9, it reads, But they, in their own kingdom, with your great goodness which you gave them, with the broad and rich land which you set before them, did not serve you or turn from their evil deeds. Notice that phrase, but they, in their own kingdom. We all have a tendency to get lost in our own little kingdom, don't we? And we begin pursuing kingdom things. Not kingdom things like God's kingdom, but rather our own little kingdom stuff. And we get locked in our own little world. And worship becomes about anything and everything other than God. We're sitting there, and maybe you're doing it right now. You're thinking about all the things that you've got to do to get ready for tomorrow. You're thinking about all the things that you've got to do, when you get home from church, where you're going to eat, what you're going to do about the upcoming week at work, whatever it is. We've got to break those things. We've got to put those things aside. And let me tell you something. If you do that, I promise you, your own little kingdom will not fall apart. It'll be there waiting for you when you get done. Because there is nothing more important than worshiping God. Some of you have had a near-death experience. Some of you have dealt with the effects of cancer. And you have come to the realization, if you hadn't before, that this life is terminal. That none of us are getting out of here alive. You have realized or come to the realization that we're all born with an expiration date. And I bet you that realization has made you think, you know what, all these things that I've been pursuing in my own little kingdom are not as important as I thought they were. They don't mean as much as I thought they did. And when I have stood at the bedside of an individual who is dying and breathing their last breaths, I've never once had a conversation with them where they talked about their own little kingdom stuff. They always say things like, I'm excited to get to see whoever went on before them, their wife, their child, whoever. Or they say things like, pray for me, Chris. I hope I've lived a good enough life. I think I'm prepared. They don't focus on those little things. They focus on what matters most. Finally, our worship, in order to be pleasing to God, must have a broken heart. We see that it was with a broken heart that the people confessed their sin in Nehemiah chapter 9. You notice these words in verse 33. For you have dealt faithfully, but we have acted wickedly. How many of us need to say that same prayer? You have dealt faithfully with me, but I have acted wickedly. Worship is an expression of the heart, and our hearts must be broken before God, because a broken heart recognizes our own sinful nature in comparison to the Almighty God, and we must approach His throne in complete humility and total submission. Oh, may your glorious name be blessed and exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are Lord. That's verses 5 and 6 of Nehemiah chapter 9. Proper worship begins with the proper heart, and if our heart is not broken before God, that means that we don't need fixing. And if I don't need fixing, then guess what? I don't need God. David said it really well in Psalm 51 and verse 17. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. Let's break our hearts when we come to God in worship. There was an auto body shop, a shoe store, and a church, all on the same road in this particular town. And all three of them had a problem with possums. The auto body shop owner decided to get some cats, and he turned them loose in the shop. Well, that worked. It ran off the possums, but the cats were more of a mess than the possums were. So that didn't really help. The shoe store owner decided to trap all the possums and take them out of town and turn them loose. But guess what? They all came back. So that didn't work. The preacher at the church came up with a novel idea. He trapped all the possums, gathered them up, and baptized them. And he hadn't seen one of them since. Isn't it a shame how many times we accept the gift, but we don't appreciate the giver? How sad it is that we take the gift that has been so richly and freely offered, and we do nothing with it. We waste it. We toss it aside like it's no good. Don't forget the price that was paid for you. You are responsible for the death of another human being. You are. I am. It should have been us. But God, in His rich love and mercy, sent His Son to take our place on that cross. Never forget that. And in fact, let that compel you through life and motivate you in everything that you do. Make it be fresh on your heart and your mind constantly. Let it be something that drives you and is a catalyst for you every day in your life. And see how much different your life will be. Stand up and praise your God, because you were made for this.